The Holy Gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ according to Luke. Jesus said there was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered in sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us, a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them, so that they will not also come into this place of torment." Abraham replied, "They have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord. The great problem for the rich man, the great sin of this rich man, is fundamentally that he is unmoved on behalf of his neighbor. Every day he passes by Lazarus at his gate, Lazarus laying in the dust. And every day after he goes past Lazarus, he feasts sumptuously. He knows Lazarus's name, right? Because he ends up calling out to Lazarus by name, or calling out to Abraham, but naming Lazarus. He knows Lazarus' name, but he doesn't see him as a person, as a whole other person. We know that because when you see someone as a person, you do not walk by them while they are sitting at your door, having their sores licked by dogs, and then you go have a feast inside. And then the rich man dies and is in Hades. And the literal translation there is a place where one is unseen, a place apart. So it's this inversion of his worldly experience where he didn't see, and now he is in the unseen place. And Jesus continues his depiction of such a rich man, one who is unmoved. From Hades, he looks up and he sees Abraham with Lazarus next to him. "Father Abraham, send Lazarus to bring me some water." Even when he's in hell, even when his life has led him to live in this place, and Lazarus' life has led him to be with Abraham, he still just sees Lazarus as someone to serve him. Send him to bring me water here. And Jesus further exaggerates that situation when Abraham says, remember how in your life you had your good things, and Lazarus in like manner his evil things. And now you're in these places. But even when Father Abraham prompts him, the rich man does not remember. He says again, well, then send Lazarus to my brothers so that they can be saved. Have Lazarus serve me in some other way. And Jesus imagines Abraham saying, between you and us, a chasm has been fixed that no one can cross. And I thought, of course, a chasm has been fixed between the two of you. This rich man is entirely unmoved by the personhood of Lazarus. He has chosen himself repeatedly not to move toward his neighbor. He still desires a chasm between himself and Lazarus. So while his body may be in agony, his heart is exactly where he wants it to be, far away from that other person. And I thought perhaps it's true that after death, the chasm that we choose during life becomes permanent. Or perhaps it's true that for a person like the rich man, the chasm can't be crossed because he refuses, even in eternity, to open his eyes to that neighbor. Maybe those are just two ways of saying the same thing. On Thursday, the leaders of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, they came to Washington, D.C. for a congressional hearing. And the way this was arranged is there's a room full of these leaders, but 5 of them would sit down at this table across from our legislators, and they would tell the stories of the poor whom they knew, whom they remembered, toward whom their hearts had been moved. And they each had 2 minutes to tell their story. And then those 5 would get up and take their seats, and 5 more would come and sit down to tell their stories. And while they were changing over their seats, Reverend William Barber, one of the co-chairs of the Poor People's Campaign, he remarked to the legislators, I've talked to some of y'all and your staffers who said to me, don't say poor. Talk about the economy. Talk about lifting up the middle class. Don't say poor. And for clarity's sake, I don't want to have there's no secret subtext to this. There were no Republican legislators showed up for this hearing, but he was calling down the Democrats who had showed up. Okay, so in election season, it's a good time for all of us to speak up and call out everyone who's asking for our votes. We're in a culture that doesn't like to say poor. And in my own work with the Poor People's Campaign, I've heard the same thing. And people will say to me, why call it the Poor People's Campaign? And the answer is because Lazarus is still lying at the gate. And if we can't say Lazarus's name, then we can never see Lazarus. And if we can't see Lazarus, then we could never move toward Lazarus. And if we can never move toward Lazarus, then we still have a chasm that cannot be crossed. And so 5 more people would sit down at that table, and they would read into the congressional record. They would lay testimony into the congressional record of the names of our poor. Remember how they are living their lives today, and you are living your life today. And that's the message of Jesus in this parable that's the message of Jesus for all of us, right? We're the 5 brothers in the parable who are still here above the ground with a chance to change, a chance to choose, a chance to listen, a chance to move toward our neighbor. And I think the good news is not only that we can and we should allow our hearts to be moved towards our neighbor, but that the good news of Jesus Christ is that we can become the kind of people who are moved. Become the kind of people who are moved. In contrast to the rich man, who is the kind of person who desires not to be moved. Look at how Jesus taught his disciples. Think of his examples. The children tried to come towards him, and the disciples said, no, stay away. And Jesus said, let the children come. And Jesus was in a crowd, and someone reached out and touched the hem of his garment. And Jesus said, who touched me? And the disciples said, oh, everyone's just bumping into everyone. But Jesus went towards and found the woman who had needed to touch the edge of his cloak. Or there's 5,000 people on a hillside, and they are all getting hungry. And the disciples say, send them home. And Jesus says, you feed them. You go towards them. Or the blind man who calls out from his mat, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And the whole crowd tries to shush him, but Jesus goes toward him and heals him. Jesus wanted his disciples to become the kind of people who move toward poverty and hunger and hurting and sickness. One of the folks in the formation class from 9 to 10, she said, in nursing, I would see people and I could tell what they were feeling. I could tell if they were in pain, physical, but even spiritual and emotional pain. And I didn't always want that, because then I would think, oh, there's someone else for me to pray for. But when she could accept that gift, she saw and she knew that it was a gift to be the kind of person who moves toward their neighbor. When I was listening to the testimony on Thursday, I was hearing it almost as a lecture. I don't know why I opened it up if that's what I thought I was going to hear. But I was hearing statistics, I was hearing grief, I was hearing anger, but I wasn't, as I look back, I wasn't being moved in my heart. And then the president of the National Council of Churches spoke, and she named first the people who she knew as a pastor in Baltimore who were poor. And she remembered them and their stories. And then she said to the legislators in front of her, you have the power. She named their power to choose to continue in the way with the chasm or to move closer. And then she said, Lord, when did we see you hungry? Lord, when did we see you thirsty? When did we see you in prison? When did we see you living out of your car? When did we see you going to church without shoes? Lord, when did we see you searching through garbage for food to eat because the school is closed? And maybe it's because I have children who are in school right now, and every week there's a little thing to fill out about those school lunches. But that story, that witness just pierced me. And I went from listening as someone who was fine where I was to being laid open and wanting to please God, close that distance. As she said those words, I just began to cry and to say sorry to Jesus. I saw Jesus in that person looking for food. I spent the whole rest of the day that way, just laid open. I went over to St. Matthew's in Goffstown for the installation of the new rector there that evening, and Bishop Rob was preaching. And thanks God that he was preaching about how God gives us everything, how we are inadequate to receive it all. But the moment we realize that and open ourselves, God can work with us. I had this strong impression, this no illusion, that if I died tomorrow, a chasm would still be between me and Lazarus. But thanks be to God, I could weep for that chasm. The hope of discipleship in Jesus is that we might be the kind of people who are moved toward our neighbor when we're reminded. And we'll need that reminder so many more times in our lives. But that we would be the kind of people who would be moved when we hear it. And certainly Jesus was also saying this: don't wait. Be moved today.